that there's a good possibility that they will come tomorrow night to hear the Katha here? Please raise your hand. Good possible, huh? Okay, about half of us at least will be here. The reason I'm asking is Smita Krishnaswamy is booked for tomorrow evening here. So I'm going to try in my humble way to prepare for his description of Srila Prabhupada's arrival in Sweden, which he was there for. I came a little later, so I'm not. That's his topic. But so I will try to explain a little something about the preaching background, which facilitated and was important and intrinsic for Srila Prabhupada's presence and preaching and starting the movement there in Sweden in '73. Okay, that's one thing. Now I also want to mention about Srila Prabhupada's arrival in the United States 50 years ago, as we all know. And also Srila Prabhupada's final departure from the United States in beginning of August 1976. And I'd just like to reflect a little bit about where I was at those times, and just as a personal reference. Okay, that's the second thing I wanted to do. And then the third thing is that I would just like to speak a little bit about the future, some future plans about preaching in Sweden and in general from my limited point of view. Okay? So first of all, let's start with Srila Prabhupada's arrival in the United States. So as we know, 50 years ago, Srila Prabhupada arrived. And the Jaladuta stopped in Boston, right? It was there for about a day, docked or something like that, right? And it's explained in a conversation that the immigration formalities actually took place on the boat. The officers came on, and they, examined Srila Prabhupada's documentation, etc. And then Prabhupada recalls that they asked him, well, how long are you going to stay? He had a basic visa, so he was definitely in. But, they wanted to ask him what his plans were. And then, so Prabhupada said that he was reflecting well, I have this sponsorship for a month there of, an acquaintance who has a son in Butler, Pennsylvania, who made the formalities to facilitate Prabhupada's visa acquirement there with the Indian Embassy in New York. So Prabhupada was saying, well, I have a month, but, maybe I can push on somehow or other for another month. He said later. And then he told the man, he said, well, 2 months. And then the man said, okay, 2 months.
He gave him 3 months.
He gave him 3 months. Oh, really? Okay, I'm sorry, I got that.
Do you have any personal experiences? Personal stories?
Oh, yeah. I'm getting to that. Okay. But, yeah. But what happened was, I just want to mention that Srila Prabhupada, he was later given permanent residence. And that was only possible because of a major decision in the American foreign policy, American immigration policy. It was not since at least 1920, or actually in the 1800s, in effect, Africans and Asians were excluded from immigration to the United States. And to make a long story short, you could just say it was the Oriental Exclusion Act. But in 1965, after the Civil Rights Movement and so on, Lyndon Johnson, he signed the INA Act, the Immigration and Nationalization Act, at the foot of the Statue of Liberty in 1965. And that gave quotas of 150,000 or something for Asians and Africans, 150,000 a year. So on the basis of that, Srila Prabhupada was able to get later. It was not enacted until 1968, so Prabhupada had trouble in the beginning, but finally getting a lawyer, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was in the Montreal embassy that Prabhupada got his green card, so-called, permanent residence. Okay? Yeah. So anyway, that's my point here. Why am I digging up this, American immigration policies here in Vrindavan? Well, it's spiritual, I would say, because Krishna will move mountains for the sake of his devotee, right? We know Govardhans. So in order to facilitate, Prabhupada would not have been able to stay. How would he have started ISKCON if he had not gotten a permanent residence? It would have been very difficult. But, a major historical event occurred just then. So, we have to see that there's a connection here, Krishna's intervention, I dare to say. Although, completely from a material platform for the politicians who are enacting it and so on. Okay, so that was, now I just would like to reflect personally here that, at that time, in 1965 when Prabhupada came, I had just started high school, and, it was like everybody else playing football and this and that, and ambitions. It was a Christian school, and I don't think I had ever spoken to a person from India. I don't think I had known anyone. I did live in like a melting pot neighborhood, suburb in a large city, but it was all Europeans, all European immigrants in the neighborhood. No Orientals whatsoever. So I had never heard of, Krishna consciousness, of Krishna or anything. Never heard of yoga. I don't think even at that time, hardly, and certainly not vegetarian or like that. But also, personally speaking, I had a tendency to be influenced by bad association. That's a fact. Like that, that was my situation there when Srila Prabhupada came to America, and he went to Butler and then passed through my hometown, Philadelphia, on his way to New York. The story goes. Okay, so anyway, that was one thing. Now, the other thing is that Prabhupada's final departure from the United States was in 1976, after Prabhupada had made a real kind of, what turned out to be his last around the world tour. He went from India, and let's see, I have it here, just a second. I can pull it out here. He was over 80 years old, as we know, right? And he went from India to Honolulu, and then to Los Angeles, then he went to Detroit, Toronto, New Vrindavan, Washington, D.C., and then finally New York City in July, like summer of '76. And in New York City, it was kind of like what you could call a homecoming for Prabhupada, because the devotees had a skyscraper there on 5th Street, I think it was, and they also had arranged for a Rath Yatra down 5th Avenue. That was really something. And so there was also a big initiation there, over somewhere around 100 devotees, it says. And Hari Suri records this in his diary. He says like this, quote, "It seems that every time Prabhupada holds a big initiation, he becomes afflicted with some type of physical ailment. He now has a heavy cold, which is worsening." So that was on July 20th. So the devotees were imploring Prabhupada not to travel on. He had plans to go on to Europe and then on to Iran. Right? Europe, France, Iran, and then back to India. But he'd spent a very nice day in Gita Nagari farm there in Pennsylvania. So they were in trying to induce Prabhupada, convince Prabhupada he should just stay and go to Gita Nagari and recover his health, and then travel later. So, and factually, they reported that the GBC unanimously, requested that Prabhupada would do that. And then Prabhupada said, "Okay, I'll do it," but he never did it. He wouldn't. He was definitely going on with his plan. And the famous story, the story in the Prabhupada Lilamrita is that when he was in the skyscraper there, and he was getting ready to go. And then the devotees were imploring him, please stay, a last time. And then Prabhupada said, "I want the benediction to go on fighting for Krishna, just like Arjuna." So he went across the Atlantic, a rigorous flight, and came to London, and he was very ill. Devotees didn't really realize it when he got off the plane, but in fact, they had to stop. We got in the car, and they had to stop on the way to Bhaktivedanta Manor when Prabhupada was, had to... he was dry heaves or something. It was like very bad. Hari Story describes it, coughing up mucus or whatever it was. So Prabhupada, he got to London there in 1976. And he asked his secretary at that time was Harikesha Swami. I guess he was Swami at that time. And to arrange for directly go from London. He's so sick, let me go directly to India from London. But what happened was that Bhagavan Maharaj at that time and Prithu Putra Swami, I think it was, they came to London and they implored Prabhupada, that it's very dry and hot at the New Mayapur farm in southern France, and we have a chateau and we have our own cows and our own milk and we're growing grains. It's very healthy. Please come. And I think Harikesh had a hard time to arrange for the tickets. So it was, Prabhupada said, okay, he went to France. Now, for me, that's really an important turn of events because our Stockholm temple president, I wasn't even initiated then, I had just come to the temple. Smita Krishna Swami was preaching to me, also Aristahe. So I had been 6 months in the temple and had been recommended by the temple president for initiation. So at that time he called us in Stockholm. He called Ajit actually. He called his, the other temple president, can you say? And he said, send the brahmacharis, the traveling Sankirtan brahmacharis down in their van drive down from Stockholm down to New Mayapur, the chateau in France. So I got to go also. So at that time, Prabhupada's tremendous determination to go on in old age and accept disciples for initiation, that was the reason that I was able to be a Prabhupada disciple. But just to give you an indication of the what do you call it? The spirit of the day, at that time. Yeah, I got there to France with the other devotees out on the farm. In our Stockholm temple was like a very small city temple. And I was like brahmachari. I was just learning to go on Sankirtan. I could hardly speak Swedish at that time. But I was like learning. I just got a little taste for book distribution. I was nicely situated, there, getting taste for book distribution and doing, sadhana in a kind of austere temple. Remember, they didn't have any cold water in the winter time there on the Gravegarten temple, Yeah, they didn't have any warm water. Yeah, sorry. There was no warm water, in Stockholm winter cold water. It's like flowing icicles, So anyway, it was a little austere there. So it was a good situation for me. I was properly situated. But when, I got to the, farm there in New Mayapur, it was all these grihastas and, the French brahmacharinis, and out on the farm, I was like, that was where I was headed actually. That was I'd been on the farm in Sweden the greatest part of my years. So, I was naturally attracted there. And I told a personal problem that I was feeling there to the temple president. He was concerned about me because, I was like in a shaky situation. So anyway, that's the background to when it came to this, that Prabhupada didn't come out right away. We were there 3 days waiting for Prabhupada to make an appearance. He was doing a lot. I found out later from Hari Sori's diary that Prabhupada was very active in his room preaching and meeting devotees and everything, but he didn't come out. So then finally, after 3 days, he did come out and go for a walk in the evening. And then he came back and sat on the Vyasasana, and we chanted Sri Guru Charana Padma, if I remember correctly. I think that was the only time I was personally present for Prabhupada, when Prabhupada, for singing Sri Guru Charana Padma. But anyway, Prabhupada went up to his room, and I was given a chance to watch his door in the night. That was about the closest I ever got to doing Vapu Seva, personal service. But in the middle of the night, when it was pitch dark there in the corridor outside the door, I was sitting there, and I heard Prabhupada speaking. And you can be sure there was nobody in there. So we can understand that Prabhupada was doing his translation work on his dictaphone, as we all know he did. And he finished soon thereafter the 8th canto, which he completed in only 4 months. So, although Prabhupada was sick, but he was working like anything, actually, So anyway, the point was that, and from my point of view, was that what happened the next morning was that there was a debate there between the temple president from Stockholm and the Sankirtan leader who had, the brahmachari who had driven down Paragati, right? So, Vrindavan said, I think he was thinking of me, the temple president said, okay, there's going to be initiations, by the way. Prabhupada is getting ready to install Krishna Balaram here, and there will be initiations. And I had been recommended, and I had given Prabhupada a small dakshin, I was ready to be initiated. But then the temple president from Stockholm said, okay, Prabhus, you brahmacharis, your relationship with Prabhupada is distributing his books. You should now, Prabhupada came out, you were standing around for 3 days with no engagement, spacing out here in the temple. So now you saw Prabhupada, you should go back to Sweden and distribute books. So, there was a big argument, the temple president, the Sankirtan leaders, prerogative saying, no, we drove all the way down here to southern France and Prabhupada's going to make an initiation. No, we got to stay, And there was a big argument going back. And then the temple president asked, well, Bhakta John, what do you think? And I said, well, I was thinking, I'm so agitated here. And, I was looking forward to going back to my austere temple, cold shower and, little book distribution taste. So I said, well, I think we should go. And then he said, it's decided, you're going. So, we all packed into our car and drove away, leaving Prabhupada alone, with the other devotees, But, I mentioned that to Hari Sori, and he said, the temple presidents had no idea the value of Prabhupada's, association. But I'll tell you, now in retrospect, it's easy to be smart when you're looking in retrospect, right? 20/20 vision. But I thank him for doing that, Vrindavan, because, I think he was concerned about me, and he, was acting for my best. And the result was that I was initiated in Stockholm. I think that's important for me. I feel that Prabhupada placed me there, although, he didn't do it directly, it's just my imagination, But I really think that Prabhupada placed me there, and this quote from the CC about, his sending his intimate devotees to Vrindavan, Sanatana Rupi calls it Prabhudatta Desh, the country which has been given to you as your residence and your place of service. I relate to that. And the other thing was that when I got back to Sweden, then the letter came, and Prabhupada recommended that the GBC, local GBC, that was Jayatirtha at that time, and he would perform the Jagya. He did that, and he was expert at that. And I liked him. He was very kind upon me. He was the first American devotee that I ever met, and he took a liking to me and was a help for me. I appreciate him. But in the middle of the initiation, there was a child who started screaming downstairs, and to get the child out, you had to go right smack dab through the middle of the temple room. So the Jayatirtha's initiation came to a screeching halt until the kid was out the door, and finally it quieted down. He could start again, and he looked at me and he said, "Take this as a warning." As a lesson, I guess it was. Take this as a lesson. Whether I did that or not, that's another thing. But anyway, I remember that important. But more important than that was the thing that I was reading then, the first canto. And I came to the verse where Narada Muni had drunk some water, he got refreshed, and was meditating there, and he realized Vishnu in the heart, and then disappeared, and then he heard the voice. And it was his initiation. And in that, there's a very important verse where Prabhupada says that one who is initiated, or Narada says rather that, after being initiated by the Lord, I traveled without being envious, and I was also humble, and conducted by one single desire, to go back home, back to Godhead. And in the purport, Prabhupada said, this is in a nutshell the attitude of a devotee when he becomes initiated. And when I read that just at that time of my initiation, I really felt that this was Prabhupada's personal instruction for me. So that is my little story there. Okay, that's part one. Now, part two is a little brief that was, Prabhupada's arrival in America and his final departure from America, and then on to, after France, by the way, after installing, Krishna Balaram and initiating, Prabhupada went on to Tehran there. That's a very interesting conversations there. Then he went back to Bombay, etc. Okay, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Now, a little background to Srila Prabhupada's arrival in Sweden in September of 1973, which I think Smita Krishnaswamy I hope will speak about tomorrow. Little background is that, that in the 1800s and up to around the beginning of 1900s, there was a great interest in Europe in, or say, esotericism. The Theosophists particularly, they were, high time. In fact, the king of Sweden invited Henry Alcott, who was a follower of this mysterious Russian aristocratic lady, Miss Helen Blavatsky, Anyway, who had been to India and with Leadbeater, and they had, made a big splash for Europeans in, introducing Indian ideas. And anyway, it was a very big, prestigious movement then. And like I said, the King of Sweden invited the representative of the Theosophists for an official reception in Sweden at the turn of the century, 1900, roughly. But this petered out, especially in 1920 with Krishnamurti. There's a whole history there. But later in the 30s, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had a strong desire to preach internationally, as we all know. So he sent preachers to Europe, and they were received nicely. There was, particularly, it's an interesting history that they also, aside from many in London, they also went to Germany. Now, in the 1930s in Germany, that was, the startup of the socialist nationalist movement, which became Nazi. And at that time, they were very attracted to Indians' concepts, or what they construed were Indian concepts and Indian symbols and so on. And naturally, they were very interested to hear from, I think, mainly Ban Maharaj, particularly. This is recorded in a book which has been written by, a scholarly book written by a Swedish devotee named Pranavadas, or Ferdinando Sardella, who has written a history of Bhaktisiddhanta, his life and teachings. A very nice book, important book. And there, the encounter between the Gaudiya Math devotees and the German scholars is recorded there. And it's interesting to note that when the Gaudiya Math devotees explained explicitly about Krishna consciousness not being the body, not at all interested in nationalism, quite the contrary, and also about the equality of all beings, they didn't like it. They didn't find it conducive with their understanding of what they were looking for from Indian concepts. That's important to note. That's clearly indicated there in the elaborate explanation there by Pranavadas. Okay, so there was in the 30s there, and at that time, though, there was a scholarly German whose name was Professor Schultz, I think his name was, and he went to India, and he was a searcher. He was looking for spiritual, and he met somehow. Anyway, he got in contact with the Gaudiya Math, and he became Sadhananda, Sadhananda Das, and later Sadhananda Swami, right? And he was initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta. Actually, someone on the stupid phone, I'm so sorry. I have a nice dial tone though, don't I? Okay. Anyway, back to the storyline here, is that one interesting thing was is that if you look at his picture, he looks a lot like Bhaktisiddhanta. Or he looks in a way, at least, you can safely say. One of our Swedish elders, who Smita Krishna Swami will certainly mention tomorrow night, who arranged for Prabhupada to speak at a prestigious place, the Stockholm University there. He knew Sadhananda well, or at least quite a lot, and he called him an identical twin to Bhaktisiddhanta. That's that's an exaggeration for sure, but Sadhananda, what happened was that when the hostilities broke out in the Second World War, then he was here in India, and he was imprisoned, prisoner of war. Whether it was a house arrest or whatever it was, I don't know the history that well, but he was incarcerated, right? So that was there in the prison that he met an Austrian Jew who was also a seeker. His name was Walter Eidlitz. And Walter Eidlitz, he later became Vaman Das or Vimala Krishna Das. His initiation history is a little complicated, I think. But in any case, Walter Eidlitz was also thrown in jail here in India during the hostilities. So for years, like 5 or 6 years, they were in the same prison. And Walter Eidlitz, this Austrian Jew, he took shelter of Sadananda and became, his disciple, more or less. And although Sadananda didn't accept disciples formally, but he was Shiksha disciple, and in this way, totally imbued with bhakti and Krishna consciousness. So what happened was that when the hostilities ended in 45 or whenever then they were released. So Walter Eidlitz returned to Europe, but he didn't return to Austria because his wife and their son, they had fled and were given asylum in Sweden to flee from the Nazis, persecution, the Holocaust. So Walter Eidlitz went to Stockholm, there where his wife and son were. And the Stockholm University accepted him on the administration. I think he worked, was the history. And he was writing a book about Lord Chaitanya, and in German. He was writing a book in German, and the Stockholm University published it. And that was ready. He wrote other books also, which were translated into Swedish, which were filled with Krishna consciousness, all about Lord Chaitanya and everything. And they've had quite an influence on many of the Swedish devotees. Many of the Swedish devotees, they previously, before they became devotees, were influenced by Walter Eidlitz's books about bhakti. And then when Prabhupada came, it clicked. Okay, but what I mean to say here is that the Stockholm University published his book in '68, a thick book, about 500 or 600 pages. The German title was, Lord Chaitanya, His Life and Teachings, something like that. And Walter Eidlitz sent it to Prabhupada, who was at that time in Montreal. And Prabhupada got this book and he was impressed. That's clear. I don't have the quote right in front of me, but it was clear to Prabhupada that Sweden was ripe for Krishna consciousness. The Stockholm University had the first, major. Of course, I think there was a French Bhagavatam earlier. Maybe some, but this is like the first major book of Chaitanya Vaishnavism in Europe, right? So Prabhupada was, impressed, and he liked the book. It was in German. Prabhupada didn't read it, of course, but he could understand by looking at it that it was a very good book. And Prabhupada also wrote about Sadananda that time, because the book was kind of a collaboration. Sadananda had been involved in the production of the book. So, Prabhupada wrote about Sadananda, and Prabhupada was very affectionate to Sadananda. He called Sadananda had a soft heart like a Bengali, and said that he was very kind upon his children, that Sadananda was very affectionate and kind upon Prabhupada's children, and so on. They had like Prabhupada wrote very nice words about Sadananda, like that. So, yeah. Now, one last thing before, I'll turn it over. Smita Krishna Swami has much more, Prabhupada direct Katha about this. But one last thing that I mentioned, that we have a senior elder, he's now over 80, who at that time he was on the faculty at Stockholm University, but he was a Vaishnav. In fact, he had invited Walter Eidlitz to live in his house there in Stockholm at that time. And later, in '73, when Prabhupada came, Walter Eidlitz was living his last year or so. at this gentleman's house, this teacher at Stockholm University, and then the devotees approached him and asked him if he could arrange for Prabhupada's speaking at this prestigious, however secular institution. Sweden in 1973, highly secular. So for religious program, it required to have get your foot in the door. So this man, he stuck his neck out, you could say, to book the prestigious place. He got in trouble for it also. He doesn't regret it though. Factually nowadays, he's very kind. We were visiting him in his ashram in Radhakund. He has an ashram in Radhakund where he stays half the year nowadays in his old age. And he has a goshala with, how many was it? 250 cows. He's a nice guy, believe me. His name is Nitai Das. He was initiated, not in, anyway, he has a complicated, he also has a complicated initiation history. But anyway, that's where we're at when, Prabhupada came to Sweden in 1973. Okay, that was part 2. Now I have 5 minutes more. Okay, max 15, all right, including questions or discussion. Hopefully, Smita Krishna Swami, Ariste Prabhu, others, Rathayatra Prabhu will, Yeah, okay. All right, so let me do my duty here. Good thing we have Mother Parvati here, keeping the house in order here, Big hand for Mother Parvati, okay? Been doing this service or...
But he didn't speak it.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, no. You want to have the last 15 minutes? Okay. This is my third part. I wanted to hear you, Prabhu. I'm going to have to come to Chicago or wherever you're at nowadays. Okay. This is the third part now. Is a little bit about future plans now. Like I mentioned that we have a scholar there. Now, let me tell you that, I dropped out of college long before I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And, then I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And, I was, despite the fact that I was always attracted to Ravinda Swarup Prabhu's kind of presentation, but, I was kind of a little anti-intellectual, but my service was mainly on the farm doing practical work, maintenance work, and this and that, Smita Krishna Swami is very surprised. In my elder days now, I've stuck my nose into academics a little, okay? So I'm doing a graduate study now on the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, and the Swedish government has given me a grant. So I'll go there now for 4 months, and I write a report, for the development, from a development point of view. So this is a very exciting project. I'm really so pleased to have this opportunity in my elder days. I mentioned I have not been in India for 11 years. So when I get to, it'll be my 12th year since I was at the the Mayapur festival. So I'm looking forward to that. Now, in Sweden we have several scholars who are quite promising. I mentioned Pranavadas. He's now on the faculty at Stockholm University, and I think he's in charge of Hinduism. But he's publishing, and he's recognized. Although he did foundational work in establishing ISKCON. He was a devotee for many, many years, and then, when he was around 45 or something, he, started going back to school, and now he's like 50 or something, and now he has done his doctorate on Bhakti Siddhanta, this work I referred to. So now he's in the academy, and he's really a devotee, he's practicing devotee. Now that's one. The other is my mentor at this little college outside of Stockholm where I'm going. That's Ajit Das. I mentioned him previously. He was the temple president in 1976 when Prabhupada, came for his last. So he's in charge of Hinduism and Buddhism at this other school, and he studied religious pluralism is his area and his doctoral thesis and everything. That's two. And then we have several others. We have a disciple of Smita Krishna Swami, who is also published, and we have also a Swedish-Finnish devotee Brigupati or Man's Brew, and he's also, quite a recognized scholar. And like that, this is an auspicious sign that Prabhupada wanted that. He told Ajit, actually, I'm not going to, the Smriti Krishna Swami will tell more about this, but, he encouraged Ajit, to develop the academics. And there's one brahmachari, previously brahmachari, he married after, many years of brahmachari, but as a brahmachari from the end of the 80s until now, up until now, he's been cultivating a network of contacts with high school religion teachers throughout the country. And they love him. He's not the only one. I also help him, and we have others who visit and make guest lectures about Hinduism or new religious movements like that. Not from a, as one who experienced this tradition insider. We can be quite frank and, explain about Krishna consciousness quite frankly. We're not there as academics. We're there as, participants or as practitioners. And, we explain about the aesthetics of devotion and, everything like that. And we can sell books, and we can give out prasadam, and we can chant the Hare Krishna mantra. And we have a steady stream of 10,000 Swedish high school students a year who are either coming to the temple and visiting us or getting a visit in their schools around the country. So this is a significant program in this tiny little, country, right? Now, one other last thing I would just like to mention, a plan, is now in my, sunset years. Now I'm turned 65 this year, so, I'm headed for the exit. This is a good place to think about it. So my plan is to serve Srila Prabhupada in this way by going to these extremities where the devotees don't have so much opportunity to visit. Because Sweden is a very large country. It's a very small population, but it's strung out. And so there are isolated areas where the high school students don't normally get visits from devotees because it's so I want to visit these places. I want to, it's going to be lonely for me, dark and cold and long winters, but on this, begging for, the strength of Srila Prabhupada and blessings from devotees, I'm going to try and go alone to these places in my elder years and dedicate myself to try and go where it's difficult for devotees to go. Now, I've been 40 years in the temple, so if, my last days I can try and, go out and do something, that would, okay, like that. Okay, so what I tried to say was that Prabhupada's arrival in the United States and the historical miracle of his, getting a green card, and his final departure from the United States, and his heroic effort to continue on, in giving his mercy out and big initiations. Actually, I don't have time to go into it, but my last initiation in Mayapur in 1977, I think it was Prabhupada's biggest, 300 devotees. And afterwards, Prabhupada told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I feel like a dead horse. So anyway, both my initiations were related to Prabhupada's heroic endeavor to carry on to the last drop of energy. Okay, so that was my second point. And the third point was a little bit about the modern European Vaishnava, Chaitanya Vaishnava history background, and a little bit about future. Okay, so thank you very much for patiently hearing. Comments?
doesn't like what I say. Hare Krishna. Humble
For
attendant.
the audience, mention your name.
Okay, Ratyatra Das. Very good, isn't she? I like her style. She gets things done, as most devotees do. I was amazed at what you were talking about this evening, because I was just on Facebook today. We have a Srila Prabhupada's disciple group, and there's 700 of us, and we always communicate. And I was just, somebody said the post about this Swami that you mentioned.
Sadhananda.
Yeah, Sadhananda. And I was reading his Facebook page, his website.
Ah.
I mean, it was so,
Right.
just what that little thing was said, I got to check him out. And I was checking him out today. In fact, Bhaksidhanta even said something like, him and I were together for a long time or something. They're very close. Bhaksidhanta knew they were connected somehow. And then you come here and speak about it. This is mystical Vrindavan, isn't it?
Who did you say was close with?
Bhaksidhanta. Bhaksidhanta.
You were saying somebody on Facebook was talking about.
Yes, there's a